Hey, how's it going? Welcome to the Zach Peters podcast. I am Zach. Thank you so much for joining me. Thank you for listening and for watching. And I hope that this podcast helps you. And we're continuing our conversation about prayer. So let's jump right into this thing. In our last podcast, we started our series on prayer based on Matthew chapter 6. And we began with the four verses before the Lord's Prayer. Verses 5 through 8. And in the first section, I think we talked about 5 and 6. And those verses are talking about how not to pray. And so in the last podcast, we covered what prayer is and one section of how not to pray. And so first of all, let's review real fast. Prayer is communication with God. And communication is important for any relationship, but especially your relationship with God. And we talked about how prayer is not about you or what you get from prayer, but about who prayer is directed to and how that prayer connects you to God. It's about who you're talking to and not about yourself, not about making yourself look good. It's not about sounding good. It's not about sounding fancy. It's not about having all the right words. It's all about the relationship and what it does to your relationship with God. And at the end of verse 6, we came to a place where it said, God hears you in secret and he will reward you for your prayer in secret. And that sort of leads us to a place where we can realize that God is actively listening to us. We don't have to work harder for God to hear us. We don't have to do anything special for him to be listening to us and for us to connect with him. And that perfectly leads us into this week's verses 7 through 8. And it says, when you pray, do not heap up empty phrases as the Gentiles do, for they think that they will be heard for their many words. Do not be like them, for your Father knows what you need before you ask him. Again, just like last week, Jesus presupposes that we are going to pray. Not if we pray, but when we pray, we're going to not pray like this, but we will pray like this. Last week it was don't pray for the wrong reasons. This is another podcast on don't pray sort of in the wrong way. Don't pray using the wrong structure. Don't heap up empty phrases, thinking that there is some sort of special key to accessing God. Prayer is not a math equation. It's not 1 + 1 = 2. It's not some sort of magic ritual requiring specialized language in a certain order. Yes, God gives us what we're about to read the next podcast, which is the Lord's Prayer, which is very specific, but it's broad and wide in application. Let me give you some context to verses 7 and 8. When Jesus says empty phrases, what is he really saying with that? Why does that matter to us? So other religions have prayer as well. Other religions, they attempt to communicate with God or gods. And a lot of times those religions, their prayer is built on repetition. It's built on earning communication with God. You've got to do things in certain steps. You've got to say things in certain ways. You've got to pray for this long at this time in order for your connection to God to be secured and for him to answer your prayer. It's sort of an earned connection with God based on social, special, and inside language. Let me take you back to Elijah and the prophets of Baal back in the Old Testament. Right? In that story, if you go back and read it, the prophets of Baal pray and they cut themselves, they scream, they dance for hours in order to get their God's attention, to get Baal's attention. And sort of transfixed against this is Elijah's prayer, which is like a couple of words. And of course, Baal does not answer because he's not real. And God, Yahweh, does answer. It's easy for those sorts of attitudes, earning communication with God through our work, earning communication through God through special language. It's easy for that sort of mindset to work its way into our prayer life if we're not careful. If we pray like this, then God will have to pay attention. I prayed like this, fill in the blank one time, and God actually answered my prayer. So from now on, I have to pray that way. We grew up in a church that only prayed this way. And so that's the only way that prayer matters because we learn it that way. There's this instruction manual, very detailed step by step instructions that we have to follow in order for us to be heard by God. And unfortunately, that's just not the case. He already knows what we need before we ask. He's listening. He's listening right now. So there's no special language. Take away that barrier in your life. Take away the complexity of prayer that you might have and just have an open conversation with him, knowing that he wants to hear from you. And according to the last scriptures, he wants to hear from you in secret, which means he wants to hear from you in your alone time. And he wants to reward you for that attempt at communication with him. He wants to build your relationship through that. Ultimately, one of the reasons we might fall victim to the problem of specialized language or very static prayer is we sort of end up viewing God like Santa. We only communicate whenever we need something or want something, and then we get let down whenever we ask for something and God doesn't give it to us the way we wanted to. When the gift's not underneath the tree, we start to resent Santa. It's easy to do that, but also that tells us there's something wrong with our perspective about prayer. If we can avoid viewing God like Santa, I'm not saying don't offer God your wishes, your hopes, your dreams. He knows them already. He put most of them in you, He knows them. But when that's the only reason you communicate, you will get disappointed whenever that communication doesn't produce the results that you want. You will go through great lengths to pray in certain ways if you think it helps God listen to you better to give you what you want. Does God want good for you? Absolutely. Yes, he does. In fact, again, in the previous verses, he's going to reward us for our prayer. He already knows what you want before you ask. Is that reward going to be exactly what you asked for? Is he going to answer your prayer exactly the way you want? Sometimes, yeah, absolutely. Sometimes, no. But that's not why you pray. And that's not what prayer is all about. It's about the relationship. Prayer is not what we can get from it. There's no magic formula to getting God to listen to you better, to coercing God to give you your gifts that you've been praying about. No, it's about the relationship. And we need to understand and learn and listen and grow into this place where we know that God is listening to us already. And I think that's fantastic. What great news that the King of Kings and Lord of Lords is waiting for us to communicate, to speak to him, and for him to speak to us. If we can remember that it's not about us, it's not about what we get from prayer. If we remember those two things, it will help us avoid mistakes with prayer that we all make at some point in our life, right? Prayer is about the relationship. Prayer is not about us. It's not about image. It's not about language. It's not about getting what we want. And you can't earn relationship with God. You can't earn closer communication. You just have it if you want it. It's a gift to be connected to your Creator. So pray. Pray without limitation of special language. Pray without limitation, believing that it's only there so that you can get what you want. Now pray because you know that when you talk to God, you're talking to someone who can give you life in a way you've never had it before. So we're 2 podcasts into prayer. I'm going to offer a brief review, and then I'll let you go on your way today. Number 1, prayer is communication with God. Number 2, communication is the foundation of relationships. Number 3, there are good ways to pray and there are bad ways to pray. Next, prayer is not about you or what you get from it. It's about the relationship. Next, God is listening for you already. We don't have to do crazy, repetitive things to get his attention. We already have it. And we need to remember God is not Santa, even though he does answer prayers. He does give us what we want. He does bring our dreams to life. That's not what prayer is about. And that will help you avoid being disappointed when your prayer doesn't get answered the way you want, because that's not why you pray. Thanks so much. Share this. and comment on it, rate it on whatever platform you're sort of ingesting this. And I will see you next time. Thanks.